Hello everybody and welcome to That Atheist Show. I am Preston, that atheist dude. Tonight I'll be alone because Connie is just taking a temporary leave of absence. She'll be back eventually. So tonight I want to talk about something that happened in the past few weeks. It's something that's been known as the Panama Papers. It's a huge leak that happened from a Panamanian law firm called Mossack Fonseca. For everybody that's listening on IPM Nation at home, I want to kind of read off what I had going on in the intro there. It's an exchange between two people. One of the persons is John Doe, and the other is German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. I don't even know how to say that. It's a German name. Alright, so what it's saying on what I had playing on the intro here is, "Hello, this is John Doe. Interested in data?" And from the German newspaper, "We're very interested." From John Doe, "There are a couple of conditions. My life is in danger. We will only chat over encrypted files. No meeting, ever. The choice of stories is obviously up to you." The German newspaper replies, "Why are you doing this?" John Doe replies one last time, "I want to make these crimes public." So what's been happening in Mossack Fonseca is criminal activity. This person knows what's been happening and they want it to be made public. So what they did was they released 11.5 million documents, detailed documents showing evidence of tax havens being used to launder money, to do all sorts of really just crazy things that deserve to be known by the people like us. So one thing is, they didn't release the papers publicly. The reason they did that is pretty complex. The unknown source gave them the choice to choose what stories they wanted. Also, if they were to release all 11.5 million documents, they say that there might be a privatized system that might show who the anonymous source was that released it. It is known that companies use small little watermarks on certain documents and small little changes here and there so that they can identify individually people who might have access to that file. This is one of the reasons. It's not a evidence-based reason. It's just one of the reasons that they don't want to release it, just in case they are basically failing their source on anonymity. So what I want to do now is play a video from the Investigative Consortium of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. These are the people that the German newspaper went ahead and basically laid out 11.5 million documents for this consortium of journalists. This consortium of journalists consists of over 100 companies, over 300 journalists, all working through 11.5 million documents. So before I go into further detail on that and try to explain it, I want to play the video that they created to kind of introduce you to what's going on, why it should be made public, why these are criminal activities, and why somebody would come forward and say, "Hey, release these." So let's go ahead and play that video.
Over the past 3 years, Syria's Air Force has rained death on more than 21,000 civilians. Their bodies ripped apart by exploding barrel bombs, missiles dropped on homes, businesses, bus stops, even hospitals. These war crimes have been well documented. Not so the part played by the shadowy world of offshore finance. Behind the scenes, companies using offshore tax havens were accused of supplying fuel to the Syrian Air Force. In 2014, multiple governments, including the UK and US, issued bans on doing business with these companies. But now, a new global investigation has revealed that a Panamanian firm helped these companies operate as attacks in Syria continued. That firm, Mossack Fonseca, is a key player in a sprawling, secretive industry that the world's rich and powerful use to hide assets and skirt rules by setting up front companies in far-flung jurisdictions. More than 300 journalists trawled through millions of leaked records from Mossack Fonseca to expose an alarming list of clients involved in bribery, arms deals, tax evasion, financial fraud, and drug trafficking. Behind the invoices, emails, and paper trails are real victims. In Russia, businessmen kidnapped orphan girls as young as 13, raped them, then sold them to others for sex.
After this rape, I was aching all over. I started very much fearing men. I felt as though they wanted only one thing, only sex with me. When I was taken into a foster home, I felt as though my foster father would rape me if I'm left alone with him.
One of the alleged ringleaders was a client of Mossack Fonseca's. When the firm discovered their client was a pedophile, they decided they were not legally obliged to report his offshore business activities to authorities. In Uganda, a company that wanted to sell a prospective oil field paid Mossack Fonseca to help it avoid $400 million in taxes. It was simple paperwork. The company's address was changed from one tax haven to another. In a country where 1 in 3 people live on less than $1.25 a day, $400 million represents more than the government's annual health budget. Uganda spent years in court trying to force the company to pay its taxes. Meanwhile, hospitals in the shadow of the oil field lacked funds for even the most basic equipment. Patients slept on floors. They were asked to bring their own medical supplies, like sterile gloves and cotton balls.
It was a surprise to me because I expected all this equipment to be at the health center. When all these things are not there, nurses say we cannot work on you. At times, we are forced to leave and return home unattended to. Some women have lost their lives and babies.
Uganda ranks among the worst 10 countries in the world for high maternal, newborn and child mortality rates due to a lack of access to good healthcare. The offshore industry has recently come under fire for enabling dubious activities like these. But firms like Mossack Fonseca have helped clients continue to operate behind a veil of secrecy. Until this shadowy world is held accountable, international criminals will keep doing business, tax dollars will be dodged, and bombs will continue to fall.
Okay, so with things going on like that, when the company says, oh, we don't supply a haven for things like this to go on, it kind of makes you wonder how much attention are you really paying? Because there's a lot of companies out there that will absolutely report in the moment they find out these things, but Mossack Fonseca seems to be harboring these criminals and allowing these things to continue to happen. So that's why the unknown source went to them and said, hey, these criminals are functioning through this company, this should be known. Now, while I'm still on the page here for the video, I want to point out one of the main reasons why I waited to do this episode, because I wanted to find out more information on the answer to these questions here. I'm going to show the comments on this video. The fact that this is getting sponsored by the BBC, the fact that there was absolutely no focus on any Wall Street companies, and the fact that I won't talk about who's funding and supplying the rebel groups in Syria makes me question the purpose of this leak. So this person is under the assumption that there's not going to be any talk about these big Wall Street companies because they're the ones that are pushing the leak. And the next comment here, curious about the lack of US leaders being named. Next comment, what about the Americans, huh? Next comment, the rich and powerful have conspiracies to play God with people, it seems. So all of these comments here are basically assuming that because Americans are not being exposed, that they must be involved and are being hidden by these investigative journalists. The investigative journalists are being paid by mainstream media is being paid by corporations, so the corporations must be paying them to not talk too much about them being involved in these papers. Here's the thing about Mossack Fonseca not having many American politicians and big corporate sponsors on their list of clients. It's a Panamanian company. When you look at Panama and you look at America, America's got the technology, we've got all kinds of securities, we've got laws to help us out with certain things like tax havens. Panama is not going to be used by people in America because America has their own tax havens. I'm going to say something that was said by a senior advisor to the Tax Justice Network, James Henry, wrote in a 2012 report that the term, well, let me say a little bit first. When you talk about offshore tax havens, everybody thinks that offshore must mean that it goes into a different country. That's not always the case. The term offshore refers not so much to the actual physical location of private assets or liabilities, but to nominal, hyperportable, multi-jurisdictional, often quite temporary locations of networks of legal and quasi-legal entities and arrangements that manage and control private wealth, meaning the tax havens that are being used don't necessarily have to literally be in another country to be considered a haven. They can be within the country that you're operating in, and it still will be called an offshore tax haven. So what's happening here is that in Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, and New York, there are tax-friendly laws for keeping financial assets basically essentially the same way that a tax haven is operated through Panama and the Bahamas. So this brings up the answer to our question, why aren't Americans being involved? Because Americans aren't fucking using Mossack Fonseca. Whoever that released these documents had an eye on these specific criminals, and they were saying, hey, release this information. Choose which criminals you want to choose, whatever, but I want these criminals to be known because this is what I know that's happening in Mossack Fonseca, and this is what I'm able to release, so this is what I'm going to release. Pretty simple. I read within the first 2 weeks, this is the reason that I actually held off doing this episode, is because I came across the conspiracy that because the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists were all basically mainstream media, that they couldn't be trusted. I just wait until you get more facts. This all that conspiracy was made like within a week of this all happening, and it's kind of weird to me that people are assuming that 11.5 million documents of information are going to be looked through within a year with just a few hundred journalists. Come on. 11.5 million documents. So everybody's probably wondering, how the fuck do you look at 11.5 million documents at all? Like, are you going to look at each paper bit by bit? No. What they've done is they've digitized these documents so that they could use the find feature and look up what they think to be important figures in our world. What happened that they've already reported on is that Vladimir Putin of Russia seems eerily close to somebody who runs companies with multi-billions of dollars through these shell companies, and nobody knows why he has billions of dollars. The person who has these billions of dollars that's close to Putin is a cello player. Somebody who's known Vladimir Putin since Vladimir Putin was a child. So what the investigative journalists have figured out is that through this evidence of them knowing each other for so long, him being just a cello player and having billions of dollars, that Putin might be running some money through companies in this man's name to keep it away from him so that he doesn't have to file for Russia's taxes and things like that. That's the way I understand it. It seems pretty ridiculous that that you're able to do such a thing, is just get a friend from childhood and say, hey, run all these companies in your name, I'm going to run billions of dollars through it, don't worry about it. You'll be well compensated, of course. It's crazy, but this is one of the things that's been revealed by the Panama Papers, and also like the video said about the Russians. So people are probably wondering, well, what the hell is a shell company? You probably never come across that term before. I didn't until these papers came out. So I'm going to show you a video now that explains what a shell company actually is, what it does. Well, I'm going to have to refresh that page there. Give me 1 second.
So let's say you save your quarters in a piggy bank that you keep on a shelf in your room, but your mom keeps checking up on how much you're putting in and how much you're taking out. You don't like that, so what you need is a second piggy bank that you keep somewhere else. Your friend Johnny's mom is busy. She doesn't have time to check on piggy banks. You can bring a spare bank over there, then money can come and go without anyone being the wiser. But maybe Johnny's mom isn't really too busy. Maybe she's just lazy. Maybe she's deliberately telling the whole neighborhood that for a small fee, she'll keep their piggy bank safe and not pay attention to what happens. That's what countries like Panama and the Cayman Islands and other tax havens do. They have very weak regulations in terms of watching when money comes in or out of bank accounts. And they have rules that make it easy to form a corporation without disclosing who owns it. So basically everyone gets to write a fake name on their piggy bank. There's a Panamanian law firm called Mossack Fonseca. They've got over 40 offices in dozens of countries around the world. They specialize in setting up these kind of special piggy banks. They're called shell companies, hollow vessels that don't conduct any business. They just own financial assets on behalf of their real owners. There's been this massive leak of over 2 terabytes worth of Mossack Fonseca documents to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and it sheds an unprecedented light on the world of shell companies. People can use these shell companies for legitimate reasons. Sometimes you just need privacy. But they're also really useful for covering up scandalous or embarrassing information. The Panama Papers show that close associates of Vladimir Putin have taken over $2 billion worth of assets and put them into offshore shell companies. And that the Prime Minister of Iceland actually held financial interests in bankrupt Icelandic banks, even as he was involved in political negotiations over what should be done with the banks. And the main use of offshore shell companies is avoiding taxes, because the government can't tax money that it can't find. One of the memos says, quote, 95% of our work coincidentally consists in selling vehicles to avoid taxes. These tax havens are usually small countries that could be persuaded to clean up their act, but so far political leaders in the big countries haven't wanted to make them do it.
So when you look at a company like that that's helping people avoid taxes, it's good for the people avoiding taxes, but it's not good for the people in the country that the people live in. So I want to say here really fast that from Mossack Fonseca, the founder recently told the Associated Press that they prefer not to have American clients anyway. The reason for this is because nobody really needs their shell companies to be operated through Panama because they have them here, like I said earlier. They have them in Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, and New York. So, let's see. Move on to the next here. The reason that they're bad is because the ones who are using it are the elites that are lobbying the politicians. The reason that it's legal is because the elites that are using them are lobbying our politicians. And just the ability for this to be legal is taking money away from the fact that we could have better healthcare, we could have better infrastructure, because this money could be taxed, but instead they're able to just put it into a shell company and put it somewhere where the taxes won't be as high. It's freaking ridiculous. In my opinion, it shouldn't be happening. There needs to be a lot more regulation on that. But now we know why Americans aren't being involved in it. So now I want to move to our next segment. This is going to be part 1 of Shit Believers Say. This certain person is going to take up quite a bit of the segment throughout our next season, so we're just going to name it Shit Josiah Says. Now, what I want to do is show a post that happened, but first I'll explain a little bit of background story. One day I made a post, it got a lot of shares, it got like a few tens of thousands of shares. I think it was like 20,000 shares or something like that. So for many days I was receiving just like hundreds of friend requests. And I'm going through these friend requests and I'm just accepting all of them. And after like 2 days, I was like, wait a second, let me actually check some of these profiles and make sure that they're not spamming and things like that. So I started opening profiles, and his happened to be the first profile that I opened up. And when I looked through his profile, I saw a lot of calls for theocracy, saying things like, if you're not following Leviticus and stuff like that, our government needs to take over and make sure that these things are being followed and all this crazy shit. And I was just like, holy crap, this guy is psychotic. I'm definitely not going to accept this dude's friend request. Let me hit decline. So I hit decline. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and I'm like, man, this guy was like uber religious, like theocratic religious. I've never seen this before. This is very interesting. Let me go back, send him a friend request, see what happens, considering we had just started doing that Atheist show. So I was like, let me see what kind of entertainment we can get out of this. So I opened his profile after having declined his requests, and I saw this post on his wall. I'm going to read this off for our friends in the IPM Nation. Due to the drop in the number of atheists that interact on my page, in parentheses, because some know they can't win, no doubt, end parentheses, I sent one of the most hostile, angry, and militant atheists I've ever had the pleasure of meeting here on Facebook a friend requests. Laughing my ass off, turns out he accidentally denied the request and expects hell to break loose if we become friends because, well, that's just what I do. And 'cause he remembers from our first and last interaction that I'm no pushover. This should be fun. Now, under his post, he actually has a screenshot of one of my posts that I had just posted beforehand. Now, I explained earlier that I was receiving hundreds of friend requests through this viral post. I got tens of thousands of shares. So my post, I'll read it off here. It's a little bit hard to read, actually. Give me 1 second. So hard to read on the feed. Okay, so my post that he screenshotted under his post says, from me, this is my words. These are my words. Attention to all friends, new and old. I'm still receiving a steady stream of friend requests from my viral posts. I assume most are accidental from hitting the request button on the post. I checked a few and saw some theists. I've accepted all requests except for ones that I should have... Wait, I've accepted all requests except for one that I should not have accepted? I don't even know what I was trying to say there. Okay. He declared... Yeah, I should have accepted. Talking about Josiah then. He declared to bring down Planned Parenthood using scripture. I hit deny before I could think to accept. So as a warning, you will all most likely see some outrageous, idiotic, stupid claims made by people on my posts. Try to be friendly, as I don't agree with unprovoked personal attacks. If you are being a complete dick for no reason, I will probably delete you. I still have many theist friends in real life that will be caught in the mix. Treat all equally and respectfully or be blocked. I hate ignorance, but am also intolerant of baseless disrespect. So that was my post. So from his post, his original post, he's saying that I am one of the most hostile, angry, and militant atheists that he's ever had the pleasure of meeting. But then in the post that he screenshots, I'm saying, try to be friendly as I don't agree with unprovoked personal attacks. That is so militant, hostile, and angry that I can't even get over how angry and militant I am. So this is just part one of shit Josiah says. He is a young earth creationist. He actually believes that the world is 6,000 years old, and he cannot help but jump onto almost every post that we make about it. About the Bible not proving that the world is 6,000 years old. I will have more to come, definitely, about that. So that'll be the end of the first part of the new segment, Shit Believers Say, starring Josiah Curtis today. So I hope I covered everything the way that I wanted to cover it. I hope I didn't ramble on too much. This is a shorter episode than we usually do. Give me any feedback that you have. If you have any corrections that you think should be mentioned, I can mention it in the next episode. Just post a comment in below. And have a good night. See y'all later.